It's that time of the week again, folks. This is me, your host, Richard McColl, here in Bogota, Colombia, 2,600 meters closer to the stars. And this is episode 590 of the Colombia Calling podcast. We have a journalist and writer on the show, on the line from Holland at the moment. Fantastic story behind what we're going to be discussing today. It's obviously politically motivated, but we're talking to journalist Robert Friele. And he's in Holland. He's written a book. First, it came out in Dutch about 4 years ago about Los Pizarro, the Pizarro family. Of course, many of you will be familiar with that name if you know anything about Colombian history and politics. But we're going to go into that deeper now with Robert. But Robert, welcome on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. I'm at I think I'm 10 meters below the sea level. So we even out a little bit.
Even out quite a little bit. How are things there in Holland at the moment? How's life?
At the moment, it's very windy. It's very rainy, and we have elections coming in next week on Wednesday. Things are quite moving.
Okay, before I get into it all, is it as polarized as everywhere else?
Yes.
I sadly I don't know a lot about Dutch politics, but is it the right wing is very strong right now?
The right wing is very strong. The right wing was in government, and the extreme right wing will be the biggest party, but probably won't be in the government again. So people hate that as well. So it's quite polarized.
Wow. It just seems to be absolutely everywhere right now. It doesn't seem to be, someone complains about where they're from and says, well, it's the same here as well. Of course, we're moving towards elections in 2026. And yes, it's as polarized as ever. Anyway, that's another story. Robert, I think the first things first is a book about Los Pizarro. How is it that you came to write a book about this family? I mean, let's put the family into context first for our listeners. The Pizarro family, who are they?
Well, I think most people probably will know Carlos Pizarro because Carlos Pizarro was one of the founders of the M19 guerrilla that started out as an urban guerrilla that was very, media genetic. They did a lot of spectacular actions that were mostly they call it armed propaganda, and you could almost laugh about it. So he's very famous in Colombia, and mostly because when he started that peace was better than arms, he signed a peace deal with the government and then was assassinated in an airplane while campaigning for the presidency. So he's like the most famous Pizarro. And when I lived in Colombia, I had heard about him. There was an exposition about him in the Museo Nacional. So Carlos was like a household name. But then you also had Eduardo Pizarro, his older brother, I'm sorry. And he was the one that all the journalists went to if they wanted to understand Colombia. Because Eduardo Pizarro is an academic, a professor, and I've experienced it so many hours. My archive of interviews with him is like 500 pages of written out interview, and he can explain Colombia so well. So all the journalists that come to Colombia or that lived in Colombia, especially the foreign ones, they would go to Eduardo. So, and then there are two other brothers and one little sister, and I didn't know anything about them. But then Eduardo, he became the ambassador in The Hague. By the time I moved back from Colombia to the Netherlands, I was a correspondent working in South America and lived in Buenos Aires first and then in Bogota. So Eduardo moved to The Hague when I moved back to the Netherlands. And one day I wanted to interview him, and I looked on the internet a little bit more about his positions and everything, and I found this article, and it was so strange that I found it. It has disappeared. I fortunately have a copy of it. And it was an article over an interview that he gave to Gente. And that's it's like a gossip, no? Gente. It's like, you buy it in the supermarket and it tells you what happens with the stars of the telenovelas and whatever. And he was in there and he talked like 2 pages. He did the whole family history, but very shortly. And I read it, and I remember when I read that, I was like, wow, this family could condensate the whole of Colombian history, because you had Carlos and Eduardo and their three brothers and sisters, but the father of Carlos and Eduardo had been an admiral. His mother came from a very establishment family, also with a very military background. So it was very strange that these five children of them, they became so left wing in the 60s, 70s. And I thought, and I knew Colombia a little bit, and I was like, if you were a child of a military father and in a certain way also military mother, and you become extreme left and even join the guerrilla, not all of the children did, but 3 of the 5 did, that must have generated like a lot of tension, a lot of arguing, and maybe even whatever. And I was like, wow. And then of course you have the children, that's the 3rd generation, and people might know the 3rd generation now because Maria José Pizarro is one of the most prominent politicians right now in Colombia, and her half sister Maria del Mar. Both are hijas, I would say. Both are daughters of Carlos. They're in politics now. They're in Congress, both of them. Maria José in the Senate, Maria del Mar in the Cámara de Representantes. So it keeps on being a very political family. And in that family, all the contradictions of Colombia are united. And for me, as a journalist, it was a dream.
It's a fascinating family. As you said, the father was an admiral. It was in the period of Rojas Pinilla, if I'm not mistaken. He was an admiral and so on. And of course, the mother from... It's fascinating because you sort of think of the winds of change of the 60s and 70s and the whole sort of image of Che Guevara and the Cold War. And obviously, kind of repetitions of what's happening now. U.S. meddling in Latin America, which is certainly, I don't even think we can say on the rise. It's happening. We had Trump admitting to CIA operatives in Venezuela. This is a region that rightly has a suspicion towards this kind of meddling, and I just think that there's many things, as you say, the contradictions of Colombia in a family, such as the Pizarro, and this, of course, this goes into your book. One family, 3 generations, and 100 years of history translated into English. I think you bit off a story here that it is so meaty with so much in there. I wonder in your interviews, did you get Eduardo to reflect on his relationship with his parents then when he became so left wing?
Eduardo a little bit, other people a little bit more. But you get also in the family, some people talk more easily than others. Eduardo has a little sister. She's called Nina. And she was the one who told a little bit more about that stories. Eduardo has an older brother. He's called Juan Antonio, who lives in Cartagena at the moment. And he also told me quite a bit about it. So together, it was like a puzzle I had to make. And I had to go search for the right details with the right persons, because not everybody easily talks about his personal feelings. Other people are not very good at analysis. Other people, they don't have this good memory for family details that Juan Antonio had. So I had to make the puzzle and talk to everybody a lot of times for many, many hours.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that in the first few interviews, they don't open up, and then over time, sort of things come forwards. When you're doing things like that into personal family history, and then you need to earn their confidence and their respect for this type of thing, because of course, horrific things have befallen this family. So while we know a lot of it, you don't know the emotion that's still carried and the trauma that's still carried. I had the good favor of meeting Eduardo some weeks ago. In fact, for the first time ever, he was moderating a talk when we launched. I don't know if you know the academic André Gomez Suarez.
Yeah.
Who is he was launching. Well, I published his book called "We Are Not Made of Sugar." And Eduardo came as the moderator and was fantastic because he discussed the political situation in Colombia and how so many of the obviously political characters and individuals running for running for political office, I mean, the presidency, are orphans of their father, or their father or their mother have been assassinated. And of course, this happened to Carlos Pizarro, and now in the Avianca flight in 1990 that was blown up. And then you have Maria Jose. I don't think she's not going for the nomination. She was certainly up there in the running. She's not, but she will be a very important figure in politics for the future in Colombia. So I wonder, have you had an opportunity to talk to her as well?
Yeah. Of course, yeah. I talked to almost everybody. Only one person didn't want to talk. No, I talked with everybody about the history and actually the strange thing was that the confidence they gave me, for which I'm very grateful, it was almost immediately there. The thing was, I asked Eduardo if I could write this book, and he told me a lot of Colombian journalists have asked us this, but you're from the Netherlands, so that maybe makes things different. If you're in Bogota one day, I will organize a dinner with my family. You'll be there, and you can explain what you want or whatever. But I thought it was a polite Colombian way of saying no way. But after half a year, I was like, well, I just might give it a try and I go to Bogota and we'll see what happened. So on a Friday night, I had this dinner with Eduardo and his brother Juan Antonio, because Nina was away for travel. And then I in the airplane, the 10 hours from Amsterdam to Bogota, I prepared my pitch. I was like, okay, how do I? And I've been thinking about it for weeks, and then I prepared it, and I was going to explain them whatever I wanted to do and why I was the right person, and so we were sitting there and just chatting a little bit, and I was waiting for my moment to go in, to do the pitch. But suddenly Juan Antonio said, "Hey, Eduardo told me about what you want to do and your project, and it seems very nice to us, and we will help and we will collaborate with everything we can. So now let's have dinner." And that was that. And then it started.
I love this. So they had done the work before you, and so you didn't have to launch into the pitch. I like that, but I think, there's an obvious attraction and I would say benefit to being a foreigner writing this book, because you can get back, and it's something I say all the time, you're able to step on the balcony and look from a greater perspective rather than someone maybe in Bogota or in Colombia in general, who will be, as you know, they will have, it might not be as objective as it could be, but you can take a greater view of things from above. So how nice that they were obviously checking you out as they were chatting. You were waiting for a moment, but they got there first and told you can do it.
Yeah. And later on, a lot of people, they told me, the reason I talked to you is because you're not from Colombia. I talked with a lot of ex-guerrilleros. I talked with some people that were involved in the Tacoyo massacre. That's a guerrilla group of the Eduardo's youngest brother. It's a very painful history still. And a lot of people, they talked to me just because I was not from there, and I did not come with all the luggage that other people have.
Do you think that it's a different sort of level, a different degree, or a different way of measuring empathy is coming from overseas and looking at the conflict in this way?
I have no idea. I mean, I just was measuring empathy. I just was very curious about like what happened to this country, and I thought that the Pizarros would be a good answer to it. To tell their lives would be an answer to my question: what happened to this country?
So it's a greater study of Colombia, but with Pizarro as the sort of hilo conductor, the spine of the story.
Yeah.
How interesting.
So Olga Bear, who wrote the introduction, she writes a very beautiful phrase in it, because she writes that my book is Anatomía del Alma Colombiana. And it's very nice that she wrote these words. But I think, I really tried and wanted to understand, like, how people behave and why they choose what they choose. Because the interesting thing about the family, and that's why I immediately was convinced that it was an interesting story, is that they all make such different choices. So you have the admiral and his wife Margot, and they really aspire for a modern Colombia. They both were born just after the Guerra de los Mil Días, the big war, and they think, well, now we're going to do the best for Colombia and we'll make it a more modern nation. And then you have these 5 children, and they wanted the same. They also wanted a better Colombia, with social justice and everything. The thing is, they grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and that was the 60s and the 70s, we know, from Paris, 68 and everything. So they radicalized very quickly. And now you have the 3rd generation, and they're not in politics because they like it. They're in politics because they really feel that they still want to change Colombia and make it a better country. So that's, I mean, the hilo conductor is like that. They all want a better country. Only the way they do it and the modes they choose to do it are very different. And that's interesting to see and to understand, and that gives you a broader picture of the whole country.
And so Eduardo and Carlos were at the Universidad Javeriana and were thrown out for their militant views. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
That's right. Did they end up then at the Nacional, or they stay? I can't remember. What is the story? So they became sort of like members of the. I mean, I guess it's the Young Communists and militant views and so on. They were thrown out. Is that what is the timeline between being thrown out of university and then sort of, let's say, helping create the M19?
There's a few years between it. So Eduardo gets thrown out, and he decides that he wants to go to Paris. So he moves out from Colombia. Carlos, who was already in the JUCO, the Communist Youth Organization in the Javeriana, he goes to La Nacional, and of course his radicalization there goes even quicker. First he chooses the FARC. And then he discovers that the FARC is very dogmatic, that the FARC execute their own people when they're critical of the organization. So he decides to leave the FARC, and then starts M19 with some other people who also have decided to leave the FARC. So that's a little bit of the timeline there.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Maybe we should look into the M19 a little bit. Obviously, our current president, Gustavo Petro, was a very famous member of the M19. And if anyone watched the inauguration of Petro, he was up there and he put the presidential sash around Maria Jose. And, it was very symbolic. Not too long ago, obviously, before President Mujica, or former President Mujica, died in Uruguay, I know that Petro gave him a flag of the M19, which seemed a bit strange to me, but I guess he sees himself as fighting for freedom from the great yoke of the evil North, and so on and so forth. We could get into that. Perhaps you could give us, because I talk to people a lot, and when you talk about the M19, they always say more urban and more middle class. Is that more right about the M19 guerrillas?
Yeah, that's definitely right. Or at least they start out urban, and for sure they're middle class. But like, I think the most important thing was that they wanted a national guerrilla, and they didn't want a guerrilla that was based on ideologies that were imported. And of course, they were leftists, and they want to change the country, and they want social justice, but they didn't want to do it with Marxism. As one of the other founders said, we left Marxism at the how do you say it, at the customs office in Barranquilla. Well, one of his very famous one-liners, Jaime Bateman, he was also the founder, and he there's so many famous one-liners of him, but that's what he said about Marxism. So they were a Colombian guerrilla with leftist ideas, and most of them, at least the people who started it, they came from the middle class, or even like the higher middle class.
Interesting. I had an opportunity some years ago to speak to Vera Grave.
Yeah.
I'm sure you spoke to her too.
Yes.
She's a character.
Yes.
How were your conversations with her?
Very interesting, because she knew Carlos very well, and she knew M19, of course, very well, because she has been in it and did also the whole peace process. So yeah, she could give me a lot of inside accounts, of things, and also of course the anecdotes about about Carlos, that the first time they met, that she was blown away by how handsome he was, because that's what everybody saying, like, oh, Carlos was so guapo. Yeah.
Yeah, they still say it. I mean, and of course that very famous picture of him in the hat. It's almost like a Juan Valdez figure. You know, it's that
Yeah.
kind of image that Colombians absolutely love. Yeah, and I know people today who still say, "Oh, que manzote," you know.
Yeah.
So when I talked to Vera Grave, we were talking about Paz Total. Well, you know, at the start of the Petro administration and so on. But she didn't want to talk about it. She actually just wanted to talk about the British ability to organize the Queen's funeral, and because she said she found it so incredible, the organization and the marching and everything else. So I had to entertain her talking about that for about 40 minutes before she would open.
Well, probably that would be because she's like half German, or her parents, or so that must be the Gründlichkeit that she liked about the British organization.
She loved it, and I was just like, yes, I did watch some of it. Yes, I did. It was so funny. She was like, I've been waiting to talk to someone from Britain about this. It was brilliant. Yeah. So I was like, okay, there's something that you obviously write, and it's you talk about the Pizarro family, the parents being of the elite. This is a common theme in Colombia when we will, I think for generations we'll still be talking about the elites in Colombia and the grasp or the stranglehold that they've got over power in your power, land, and so on. In your research, I mean, I'm sure this came in a lot and had probably was mentioned by a lot of the family themselves. So did they talk to you openly about, let's say, this hegemony of the elites in Colombia?
Yeah, a lot, but they do not consider themselves as part of that elite. And I think maybe they're right in that, in a way, because first of all, they were and are not, they weren't and aren't very rich. So, I mean, it's a well-off family, but not like they're not billionaires or whatever. And second of all, they're a military family. And of course, the military, they form part of the elite, but in a different way than you are in the elite. You sustain the absolute elite, but you're not in it. So in that way, they said, yeah, of course, we're part of the establishment, but we're not the elite. And interestingly, one of the reasons that Eduardo thinks that he and his brothers and sister radicalized was that their parents, and especially their mother, she aspired to be in the absolute elite. So they sent their children to these private schools in Cali, and also later the Javeriana in Bogota, of course, where they were with the children of the absolute elite. And so Eduardo really, when he was in school, he felt like the inequality of that system. Because, of course, he was already, like, objectively, you could say, well, you're in that school, so you're part of the elite. But he was in that school, and he didn't feel part of the elite at all, because he saw there were big differences in wealth, in things that his fellows would do in holidays and whatever, than he could do. So there you have a kind of different view on the elite.
I think elites within elites, because you see that. I mean, I studied at the Javeriana, and you can see it. You can see it very clearly. Very interesting that on that level. So his mother had designs of them becoming, trying to break into the elite. So we would call her, I guess, a social climber as polite as possible, but
yes.
in English. That's so interesting indeed. And just back to the book quickly. You've published this book sort of 4 odd years ago. It first came out, and it's in Dutch, and it's in its fourth edition. What I mean, that means it's an incredibly popular book, and you wouldn't expect, again, with due respect, a book in Dutch about a Colombian family, well, obviously explaining the Colombian situation. To what can you attribute such a success?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a difficult question because now I have to talk about my book. Well, I can, like, objectively, I can say that the criticisms in the Netherlands have been very well. It has been very well received. Nobody knew me before this book because although I am a journalist, I work at one of the biggest newspapers. My job is more behind the scenes. I do not write articles, so my name is not out there all the time. So this was a book about a Colombian family by an unknown author, but it was very well reviewed. And immediately, I think the first edition was sold out in 2 weeks or something. So
Incredible.
yeah, and I think it's a book that people they when they read it, they will recommend it to some other people. And as long as enough people do that, you have your own marketing machine, and that's the book itself.
Yeah.
And I have, like, my wish was to write a book like in the best tradition of literary journalism. I didn't want to write a history book. I don't have footnotes. In the back of the book, I have like 50 pages of sources, but you don't see them in the book. And I really wanted the book to read very easily. And that was my most, like, when I was writing it, it was my most important thing. I wanted to be an easy read, but with contenido.
Yeah. So it doesn't read like an academic piece, which would be obviously the fear
Yeah.
of a book of this nature, that you're plowing through and going back and forth to the footnotes and everything else. I can understand the desire.
Yeah, so every I'm very sorry. Like, so my Spanish is better than my English. So and especially when I talk about this book, I think of Spanish words the whole time. But so every how to say it, capítulo, every
chapter,
I'm sorry, is a person. So you have Carlos, Eduardo, and it goes on like that. And in every chapter in itself is kind of a little adventure, like to say that. Yeah, like almost, I don't know. Yeah, it sounds a little bit yeah, I don't know, like they do in Netflix. If you watch a good series, you always they will attract you from the first moment, and in the last moment they will leave something for you to keep you lingering. Like, I want to know how that ends, and that's what I've tried to do in my book as well.
So almost each chapter is a separate piece of writing. Or if you say it's a different person, that's very journalistic to do that. It's different pieces.
Yeah, it's like someone told me it's like a you write each dossier of each person. It's like getting the drawers open, and then you tell something about it. Yeah.
So out of all of the family and this 100 years and 3 generations, which character, which individual was the most challenging?
Well, yeah, I think that must be then Hernando. And that's because he is, like, in a way, he has been like a ghost. And I had to interview a lot of people to understand that, and then also to get the facts right. And yeah, if you are a ghost, it's difficult to find the facts about the ghost. Yeah, but I think he was the most challenging, also because he was, well, it's what they told me at least, he was maybe the most talented, the most creative of all of them, and he was the one who ended up in this terrible massacre. So that's a contradiction that's very big, and also his story in the family still resonates, and it's like touching something that's really open still.
Yeah, I can believe that indeed. And obviously, when you get to the most famous character, Carlos Pizarro, the image, I mean, in your studies and in your investigations, things were pointing to him to do very well in the elections. I mean, have people come out to tell you he would have won the elections against Cesar Gaviria? He would have won, or people say, well, he would have come close.
Yeah, most people say the last.
Yeah, he would have come close. Definitely.
Like of course, in the mythology, after the assassination and the years pass, and they will be like, oh, he would have been the first president, progressive president of Colombia. I don't think he would be a leftist president. I think he would have been progressive, not leftist. But yeah, but I don't think he would have made it in the first round. No.
Fascinating, and when we think of the M19 and the very outlandish activities they did, and we're talking about it now, but it was savage. There was a lot of bloodletting. Let's not joke about it. But then there was the theft of the Simon Bolivar sword, which to date, well, it is. It is. It's good. Petro asked for it back, didn't he?
It's there.
At the inauguration.
Yeah, in the inauguration.
Yeah, because it was that petty thing where Duque had left it sort of in a situation where the guard wouldn't release it in time, and Petro said that his first mandate as president was to get that back, and that was during the inauguration, just showing the pettiness of both sides.
I was watching the inauguration from the Netherlands, from my couch, and I had to wait. I mean, you had to wait for ages to get for them to get the sword and everything. Yeah, it was.
It was, and of course it was the symbolism because they had, stolen it and so on. But then there was the taking of the Dominican Republic. That's the right Dominican Republic embassy during. I mean, that was pretty hardcore when you think about it. Perhaps you could remind us of some of the details of that.
Yeah, I think that was. That was the second action. It was already hardcore because before what they did, they had kidnapped a union leader, and then they said we will bring this union leader to popular justice, and people could paint on the walls of Bogota thumbs up or thumbs down. And of course, in the end, M19 said there were more thumbs down than thumbs up, and they executed him. And that was like when I heard and I read that story, and I also write it like that in my book. It was kind of a like a short circuit in my head, because until then I talked to the Pizarros and all these ex-M19 people, and they really talk a lot of time with a lot of romanticism about that period. The crazy things we did, and it was also really fun. Yeah, it was dangerous, but it was also fun. And then I read about they executed this guy after such a phony judgment. What was that? So and I mean, and that was a little bit of the hardcore part, what you say, and there are a lot of things it's not funny at all, and a lot of people died. And then of course they did also the embassy, and it was a part propaganda, but it was also a part hardcore, because they had a lot of people in there for weeks, and of course attacking the embassy, like one of the M19 guerrilleros, he died immediately at the door. So it was really, it was really hardcore already.
Yeah, and then they did a huge robbery or huge theft of weapons, I think. That's right? And of course, then there's the palace, the Palace of Justice.
Yes.
Now, in your, I mean, this is the thing. This is everything we've spoken to up until this point. It points to, it indicates the romance of the 60s and 70s and the desire for change. But really, they were falling into the traps of other groups by doing these incredibly savage activities. And I was at a doctor's appointment only a few days ago, and my doctor's office happened to be in the same building as, I guess, some sort of judicial reading that was going on about liberating General Plazas, who, of course, was involved in the, right there. I mean, it was still to this day. And there were demonstrators out there saying, héroe de la patria, and demonstrators. I mean, this is still a very open wound. So you're touching on it. Again, you get away from that romance and you start saying, hang on a second, they've done some pretty dreadful things. So this to me is a fascinating, it must have been fascinating to approach these topics with the family, and in particular Eduardo.
Yeah, and that was what makes this history so interesting, and you have everything. So Eduardo, when something difficult happens to him, he writes articles, and so one day, out of nothing, he sent me this article he wrote in Semana, just maybe 1 or 2 weeks after the Toma del Palacio, after they got in there. and the title of the article is Sobre el sendero del terrorismo, so along the path of terrorism. And in the article, he is scathingly critical of M19 and their decision to go in to the Palace of Justice, an operation which, because they have unity of command, and Carlos was not the number one back then, but he was the number two, an operation then which is also, to a certain extent, responsibility of Carlos. And that makes it so interesting that you have all these different opinions within the family without fracturing the family, because they remained brothers until Carlos' death. So it's not that he didn't want to see him anymore, but he was very critical and he could explain very well what happened and why it happened.
Is it true? And I can't remember. I read it somewhere. Did Pablo Escobar pay for the M19 to go in and burn the documents so that there was no extradition?
No, that was the how say it, the fake news. Back then it didn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't called fake news yet, but that was the fake news that the government immediately afterwards said. But it is true that probably M19 partially was financed by some criminal groups, and it still isn't very clear who did it and why. And it is also true that at M19 there were connections between M19 and the narcos. For a simple reason, because they both needed illegal stuff, arms. So and you meet each other at the arms shop, to say it like that, you know. So yeah.
It's not surprising. These things tend to be quite fluid between groups, especially when you're, again, on the illegal side of things. Have you gone through the files? You must have gone through the files when you're doing your research on the taking of the Palace of Justice. There's the entity called Forensic Architecture. And they went through it, and they've been able to find the old TV footage. And through this forensic lens, they're looking at reflections in mirrors and windows, and they've been able to find the delay in between when soldiers went in or the police went out, and being able to then identify who did what. I mean, it really is quite staggering. I'm sure you took a look at this too.
Yeah, afterwards, because these reports taken when I finished already my book.
Okay.
But I read all the other books that were available at the time, and it's staggering. Yeah, it's
staggering.
Yeah.
I've had them on a couple of times to talk about this, and they talked about. I think his name was Lucas Villa, one of the demonstrators in 2019 or 21 who was killed in Pereira, if I'm not mistaken. But just incredible research that can be done these days. So you are coming to Colombia with bells and whistles, and you're going to be launching the book in Colombia. I believe that the first event is in Cali on the 2nd of November.
It is.
Where will you be?
I will be in Cali on the 2nd of November in the Feria Internacional del Libro de Cali. Because, of course, the Pizarros are from Cali, so that seemed an appropriate place to do it, and also because we did it there. And then I will be in Bogota as well, and we will be presenting the book in Libreria Lerner on the 5th of November, and the 6th of November we will be in Casa 7322 in Barrio San Felipe. And on all occasions, cool. Olga Bear will be accompanying me to do the presentations.
Very cool to have Olga Bear with you. I mean, and somebody who obviously knows everything inside and out. Anyone in Cali, remember, 2nd of November, the Feria Internacional del Libro. You'll find Robert there. Libreria Lerner on the 5th, that's around the 93, 94. There in Bogota, Libreria Lerner have a very nice upstairs area for this kind of thing. And of course, on the 6th, you'll be in San Felipe, so the arts district, at our friend Boris's place called the Casa 7322. It's basically a very nice place for the arts, celebrating the arts and so on. You can get a good drink, and there'll be probably a DJ and everything else. It will feel a bit more relaxed and a bit more like a party. So go to that one. So, Robert, I'd like to thank you. Forster, before I finish, when will the English language book come out?
Oh, maybe the Spanish one will open doors to the English one. We'll see.
Well, I have a small editorial company. I can't promise you any money, but I'm interested in the book.
Well,
I had to say.
Maybe I'll see you in the 6th when DJ starts and we talk about it.
All right. But anyway, listen, Robert, thank you so much for your time. It has been really interesting to be able to discover that this is a book about Colombia. It's a book about the complexity of Colombia and the contradictions that is shown about the country, but through one family and all of the different tentacles that hang off that. So I wish you the best of luck. I don't think you need it, because I think this is a family that creates, it has its own aura here in Colombia. People know the family. They have the national recognition. So I think it's going to be a phenomenal success, but I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much.
You're most welcome. We've been talking to Robert Friele, who is a journalist and writer. His book, Los Pizarro, Una familia, tres generaciones, 100 años de historia, one family, 3 generations and 100 years of history, will be out very soon, in November, of course, here in Colombia. And if you are Dutch, well, it's out there. So I do have some listeners in the Netherlands. Please pick it up, support writers. This has been a great episode. Thank you to all of you that have been listening. And thank you, of course, to Robert. Bye-bye.